when they find the thing that they feel good at, it changes everything. They now have purpose.
Thanks for coming on, man.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So can you set the stage a little bit for the audience of what your business is, LEARNstyle? I guess we'll start with, what it is and what you do, and then we'll go back and talk about your whole story.
Yeah, for sure. LEARNstyle, we are a K-12 business, meaning that we pretty much exclusively work in the kindergarten to create grade 12 education market. And it's a company that was built with the idea that everybody has the opportunity to succeed inside of them, but some people just need some different levels of support. So we work a lot with special education communities. And as such, we have two sides of the organization. We've got a coaching side where we coach up kids on assistive technology to help overcome some of the learning challenges that they have. We work with a lot of districts around professional development to get their staff to a skill set where they can better support their students. And then we also have a software side. So we are heavily in the IEP space, which is individual education plans.
Okay.
So every child in North America that is in special education needs to have an IEP. So we've basically created a software solution that helps teachers and school systems create really effective IEPs for their students.
Got it. So before, what would an IEP look like? Just like a standard, pen and paper? They'd write down the kid's plan and then it would follow them?
Oh, yeah, so interesting. So IEPs, what I learned when I started looking to get into that space, they were really something of compliance. It had to be done. It's routed in human rights legislation. But the spirit of them is to be a living document.
Right.
So that every single day, if you as a teacher observe a strategy that a student is using, you kind of make note of that. And that becomes a part of the IEP. So the next year's teacher and the year after that teacher understands some of the strategies that really help that child. However, as I said, they were really a thing of compliance. They just had to be done. So therefore they were, as you said, pen and paper, even on a software, they were written. And they were basically put away for an entire year until next year. Basically, you had to come out, relook at it, get parents to sign it, and then you're good to go for another year. Teachers weren't actually engaging with that IEP in the kind of living format that it was meant to be.
Right. How big is the business now?
We now have 180 people working for us.
Wow.
We're supporting 2/3 of the school districts here in Ontario right now.
Okay.
And we're right now looking to push out pretty significantly. We're looking to work with the Ministry of Education out in British Columbia, and we've got a couple of other opportunities out west. So that's exciting. We're in a growth phase right now for sure.
And does your model, will it only work in Canada, or could you expand to the US as well?
Definitely expand.
Okay.
Yeah, 100%. And that's the goal. It's amazing because, Canada, we've got 40 million people here.
Yeah.
The US has as many K-12 students as Canada has population.
Right.
They've got over 40 million just kids in grade school and in high school.
Right. So how does that, to me, being in such a, peer-to-peer, unregulated type business, it seems so daunting to go and get a government contract for something. How does that process work?
It's a great question. Typically, it's through RFP. So ministries or school boards will put a request for proposal out, and then it's competitive.
Okay.
So I've come to learn that you got to be really competitive in terms of what value do you bring, what's your focus. So for us, one of our real differentiators is the fact that we work with kids in special education, and I happen to be a spec ed kid. I have dysphonetic dyslexia and ADHD. And I really understand the importance of establishing relationships with people like myself, being that I've got a whole lot of stigma based on my LD. So a lot of our offering is really, we call it a relationship-based coaching approach. So we put a relationship first, And a little saying we have, if kids like us, they'll listen to us. If they listen to us, they'll learn from us. So we got really hyper-focused on how is it that we can be really pragmatic in helping students, as opposed to just kind of putting out a list of requirements and responding saying, these are the steps we're going to do, if you will, in order to set up the technology for a child and get them onto it. It's much more methodical when it comes to the approach. It's way more holistic.
Right. So, you've had firsthand experience, clearly, obviously, with the, public school system.
Yes.
So I guess let's go back to your childhood. Where were you born?
Scarborough.
Okay.
Yeah, Scarborough, Scarbridge, Scarghetto. I got all of them.
Yeah. And what year?
1982.
Okay. And what did your parents do for a living? What did your dad do for a living?
Yeah, we're pretty much an education family. My father was a longtime teacher in the York Region District School Board.
Okay.
He went on to end his career as a principal. He worked for the Ministry of Education for a little bit. And my parents were actually foster parents. They're my parents, but they fostered young offenders.
Wow. So
we had, Gary, aside from my brother and I, my biological brother and I, we typically had 4 other kids living in our house.
Wow.
And I believe the number is they had 78 kids come through our home. So my mother was very focused on helping these kids. All of these kids were young offenders, so they were with us. They had some significant challenges.
Sure.
So she was, a saint in supporting them. But that was the childhood. It was very busy. There was lots of people around. And then being diagnosed with a learning disability in grade 4, all of a sudden my academic world kind of got really challenging, and self-esteem started to dissipate pretty quickly.
Sure.
And so my parents, did a great job advocating for me. My brother, who is 3 years older than I, he has the exact same LD that I have.
Really?
So somewhat paved the way, which was nice.
Okay.
So when I was coming along 3 years younger, the school system knew who my mom was in particular.
Yeah.
And as such, good accommodations got set up, and I was able to successfully navigate the public school system.
So grade 4, did you or your parents have an inkling of learning disabilities before that you had them?
Definitely an idea. And back, especially in the late 80s, early 90s, learning disabilities in particular were a pretty new kind of notion. Definitely there was some concerns in the fact that my brother and I were pretty much non-readers at that time when we should have been. And the significant part that they started noticing was just kind of the emotional toll it was taking on us. Like, for instance, in grade 1, I remember having to write something. And most kids had a couple of words and sentences they could write. And at any rate, I'd written this story about this red bike that I had at my cottage. And like, Gary, this was an epic story in my mind.
Okay.
Like, I imagined myself going over mountains and stuff. And so I write this story, and I'm pretty proud of it. So teacher says, who wants to share their story? So I throw my hand up. And I get in front of the class and I start reading my story. And I'll never forget this. There's this one girl in the class, like, looks at me and then looks at the teacher and says, "Teacher, what's DJ reading? He hasn't written anything." And I look at her, I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And I show her my page. Yep. I'm like, "Look at all the words." And she's like, "No, those are just like random letters strung together." I had no concept of writing. Wow. Yet I thought I was doing that. And that's when, a phone call went home to mom and dad, and they started thinking, "Oh, gosh, what's going on there?" And then again in grade 4, I was a really poor speller, and I had a supply teacher who didn't know me, and kind of got vexed with me because I wasn't spelling correctly.
Okay.
And it was one of those funny scenarios where we're just journaling, and she came around and she looked at my spelling and realized it was really bad. And so she asked me to put away my bad spelling and pull out my good spelling.
Okay.
So I did that.
Yeah.
Nothing changed. So she came down like a second time and is getting angry at this point, to the point where she actually hauled me to the front of the class and told me to write on the chalkboard all of the words I'd misspelled.
But by definition, you don't know how to
I
spell
don't
them.
know,
Okay.
right? So I write the first word that I see, which is the, and I actually knew how to spell it, THE. Everybody laughs. Teacher thinks I'm making a mockery of her.
Right.
Get shipped down to the office. And again, it's like, something's not connecting here. There's definitely some learning challenges.
So then what does that process look like? Now you've identified dyslexia, right?
Yep.
And where do you go from there?
Yeah, it's a pretty long journey. Typically, it starts with a psychologist doing a formalized diagnosis. So that comes in the form of a psychoed evaluation.
Okay.
And that's what determined that, yes, I have dyslexia and ADHD. And then that's where IEPs actually come into play. So an IEP is stood up and accommodations are put into place. So for me, at the time, it would be things like extra time on tests. But then I also had some crazy stuff where I was given like glasses that had green lenses to wear because supposedly that was going to help with the dyslexia.
Did it?
Well, I lost the glasses pretty quickly because I wasn't going to wear them.
Yeah.
So I can't really tell you if they worked or not.
Fair enough.
But that's what the journey began to look like. It was educators looking to provide accommodations to help me out. But again, LDs were so new kind of at that time that there was so much advocacy and push that needed to happen to get those accommodations in place. And that was the challenge. That was the emotional challenge that I would meet some educators that just didn't believe in it.
Right.
Or looked at the accommodations and said, that feels like cheating. Like, why do you get it an hour and a half on an hour test?
Yeah.
And that's what really started kind of eroding that self-confidence.
Right. Like the school system is so rigid in, the way things are taught. And like you said, like those accommodations to other kids or teachers could feel like, hey, yeah, why does this guy get 2 hours on a 1 hour test?
That's right.
But the real world is, by any means necessary.
Yeah.
Whereas it's, learning in the classroom is so incredibly structured.
Yeah.
That not many kids fit the perfect mold of a perfect student.
That's right. You said it perfectly. It's that's not the real world. Like I'm sure when you started racing, it's not like a formula necessarily that you learn.
No.
What is that experience like? How do you figure out how to tighten up a turn or when to accelerate faster?
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of feel, I guess. And, in a perfect world, it would be, coached one-on-one. Like as I always equate racing to golf. So, in a perfect world, some guy tells you how to grip the club and you go through the motions and you create no bad habits. Right? It's not a perfect world. No. And a lot of the time it's just kind of feeling your way through it and just having that visual reference of the faster guy in front of you or the slower guy in front of you. If you're catching him, you're doing something right, getting on the gas earlier, not sliding it. So
that's interesting. Yeah, I think the feeling thing is so true. I remember grade 9. I was probably reading at like a grade, 4 level. Okay. And my greatest fear at that time was reading out loud.
Sure. That must have been terrifying.
Oh my gosh. And first day of grade 9, I remember getting my schedule and my first class happened to be English.
Oh, same with mine. Yeah.
And I had a moment of like, I don't think I'm going to go. I'm just going to go home because that doesn't seem safe. But anyways, I go to English and it was funny. I had a teacher, and you've probably had one of these teachers, like they just are so happy.
Yeah.
Like this teacher, I swear to you, would eat like rainbows and happiness for breakfast every single morning. Yeah. She didn't like walk. She kind of floated on like good vibes and energy. So I go to the very back of the class and I just like melt into my desk.
Right.
And then she like floats on in. And Gary, I kid you not, she starts cheering for English, like straight up like hoot and hollers. It's like giving us high fives. It's just like English. It's like, yeah.
And you're not cheering for English.
I'm terrified. Yeah. Like, this is not normal. Like, nobody likes English this much. And then I got really nervous because she started talking about Romeo and Juliet and specifically started talking about how really experiencing Shakespeare is the way you're going to learn it. And at that point, she starts handing out the book Romeo and Juliet to all of us.
And it didn't change from my grade 9 English. It was the exact same
Right?
way, which is insanely difficult reading.
Yes. And so I find myself sitting there and I'm like, oh my gosh, this teacher is going to ask us to read out loud. And it's like 5 minutes in the grade 9. And so sure enough, she asks for volunteers.
Yeah.
And it's funny because me being me, my strategy was to hide. So I put the book in front of my face.
Yeah.
And I thought I was invisible. I'm like, genius, man. Like, dodge the bullet. She can't see me. No, not the case. I became like the perfect target. So
right.
She comes over. She's like, you, like, why don't you read the part of Romeo? So I was like, all right.
And you're reading at a grade 4 level.
Yeah. And then reading out loud. Oh my gosh. Like, it brings it down to like pre-K, if that's even a reading level.
Right.
So I'm sitting there and like my heart's racing. I'm in front of the class. I'm looking at the page. I can't even read the first word. Heart is racing. My palms are sweaty. And then it's my turn to read. And I remember opening my mouth and like nothing came out. Dead silence.
Yeah.
And like fight or flight took over. So I looked at my poor grade 9 teacher and I heaved Romeo and Juliet at her. That was my fight.
Okay.
And then my flight was I just started running as fast as I could in the room. I'm like, I got to get out of here. And it was funny because I'm running and I'm looking towards the back of my classroom and there was no doors, but there was one open window. So my plan became, I bet if I get a little bit more speed, I can like Superman myself out through this window. And that's way less embarrassing than like having my grade 9 English teacher like read this book with me. But it's funny, my train wreck wasn't over because I jumped out.
So you jumped out the window?
I jumped out. I was like, it made perfect sense at the time. And then I found myself in the center quad of my school.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And I found out that no doors in that center courtyard are unlocked on the first day of school. So I actually had to haul myself back into that grade 9.
You're like a fish in an aquarium there for every class.
And as I came in, everybody's cheering for me for some reason.
Cool, because you Supermaned out the window.
Yeah, I guess so. They're like, that was epic. Yeah, I met my principal that day.
Yeah.
But talking about feelings, it's so interesting because that teacher, you know, as much as I have thoughts about education, there are some extraordinary educators out there.
Absolutely, yeah.
And she was one of them. Like, she ranks up as one of my highest heroes. She found me a couple of days later in the cafeteria, and it was one of those awkward moments where I remember she walked in, and I could tell she was looking for something. And again, she's like floating on this happiness and like good energy, and then we lock eyes.
Yep.
And I look away right away.
Yep.
And I'm like, I hope she didn't see me. Then I look up and she's like coming right for me. So she's like, this is what she says. She goes, DJ, English misses you.
Was this during English class?
No, this is a couple of days later.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sitting in the cafeteria with all my friends and she just approaches me and says, English misses me. I'm like, oh, wow. I'm like, yeah, I miss English too. And then she nailed me with what became a life-changing question because she looked at me and she said, what are you so afraid of? And I remember in that moment with my friends, like the obvious response to that was nothing, you know, I'm the king of the world. But like I could feel my whole heart just sink into my stomach.
Yeah.
And she nailed it again with me. She's like, DJ, really? Like, what are you so nervous? Like, why'd you run away? Why'd you jump out the window? And she was smart enough to recognize my entire demeanor changed. So she kind of grabbed me and threw me in the hallway.
Yeah.
And Gary was crazy. I just like all this emotion just boomed out of me, like just unconsolably crying. And the fact was, when she asked me what I was afraid of, at that time in my life, I was afraid that I was stupid. Like I legitimately thought, I don't think I'm as smart as everybody else. And she was funny because I remember looking at her and hoping she was going to hug me because that's kind of normal.
Yeah.
But not her. She's like, thank you for sharing that. That's fantastic information, DJ. Thank you. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, hug me. I'm not okay. But it was interesting because, you know, she kind of recognized something was off and she did something about it. It wasn't like she chose to think outside of the box. She chose to care. And she said, we got to get you back into English. We got to make it a safe space. And she came up with a strategy. And she said, let me do this. The next time we have to read out loud, I'll tell the class, next period we're reading out loud, come prepared. And that's your call to action to come find me after school. We'll find a paragraph. I'll mark it down, and I promise you the next time that we read that you get that paragraph. So you go home and rehearse, do your thing.
Right.
And it was funny because being somebody that lived with stigma, I'm always kind of scenario planning, trying to figure out when is this going to fall down and break.
Right.
And I don't know about you, but in grade 9 English, we would kind of sit in our chairs, and reading always happened. You started with one student, then the next student read, so on and so forth. So in my mind, I'm like, okay, I'm the 4th paragraph.
Yep.
Which means I got to get to class early and sit in the right chair.
Right.
But then there's always that person that like chooses to read 2 paragraphs.
Yeah.
Why? You just have to read one. So I'm freaking out because I'm like, Miss, this isn't going to work. Like,
right.
The person's going to read my paragraph, and what am I going to do? I'm going to read my paragraph, which they just read. I'm like, it's not normal. Like, this is not going to work. So she's like, you're right. How about we start doing random reading where I'll randomly choose people, and when it's your time to read, be sure to put your hand up, and I will randomly choose you to read that one out loud. So we ran with it, and it worked. It was amazing. Like, I stood up, and I read for the first time in front of a group of people, but I felt prepared because I had that strategy in place that created that safe environment. And it changed everything because I really started valuing how strategies and accommodations truly can support individuals like myself, so that in English, no longer am I counting the minutes for the class to be over, but I'm actively engaged in that class simply because an educator took interest and created that safe space for me.
Right. Yeah. Like there really are strategies, whether it's, prepare earlier or work way harder, or, it's funny, in university, I found on my laptop that there was my laptop could read to me if I highlighted.
Yeah.
So like I'd, instead of sitting down and reading for hours, I'd clean my room or something. And like,
and listen.
I had to be close to my laptop, but I'd, putter around cleaning my room and listen. And I had always listened, like when YouTube came online, it was like, oh, this is amazing.
Yes.
There's back catalogs of, people that I want to listen to that are on YouTube.
Yeah.
And now like I'll physically read half a book a year, but I'll listen to 1 book a week.
Yeah.
Because I can do that. And like, that's something that really came online when I was in university that I wish I would have read books in high school.
Yeah. But see, what you're talking about, like that, there's accommodation, and that like talking about kind of perfect worlds, there's this concept of UDL, which is universal design learning.
Okay.
And the idea there is everybody has different learning abilities. Some people call them learning modalities.
Okay.
And the perfect lesson plan would have multiple modalities basically baked into it. So there would be a visual component for visual learners.
Okay.
There would be a sequential component for people that read and learn that way. There would be a hands-on component for kinesthetic type learners. There'd be an audio component for the people that learn through listening. That is a perfectly UDL designed lesson. And so the idea there is you don't really need much accommodation because you've already accounted for every type of learner that is in front of you.
Right.
So like nowadays, most school boards have that type of text-to-speech software.
Right.
And teachers should be encouraging kids to partake in it because you're probably an audio person that you learn that way. That is your modality. So you're going to get the most out of listening to something than actually reading. You and I are so similar because I've got a stack of books at home that I've read.
Right.
But what I do is I download it on Audible.
Totally.
I listen to it, but I want the credit, so that I then buy the actual
I haven't
book,
gotten that far yet.
and I put it on the shelf.
Yeah.
It's not even cracked open, but I've read it.
Right.
Well, I've listened to it.
Right. I need to start doing that. Fill my bookcase.
That's what I'm saying, man.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Huh.
So what was school like for you? Were you the kid spinning in the back of the classroom? Were you pretty studious?
It's funny, and I was gonna ask you if, and I think I already know the answer, but for me, I wasn't a super great student, maybe like K to 5. I was so into playing soccer and sports and stuff. And then when I went to middle school, because there was a separate middle school, 6 to 8, it was like a switch went off and I became a pretty good student. I was the student of excellence in grade 8.
Were you really?
And I think
that should be in the trophy room, man.
Yeah, I don't think I got a trophy.
The certificate should be there.
And then going to high school, probably just like an average student again. But I don't think I really even started like really learning until university or even beyond.
Yeah.
Like I don't think, I wasn't really interested in anything in school or really any subject or the way it was taught. But in university, like I guess it's probably fits somewhere into your model of doing things. Like I remember taking macroeconomics in university, and they're pretty pretty ethereal ideas of what's going on in macroeconomics. So I can YouTube all of this stuff.
Yeah.
And to the point where I got so into macroeconomics that like I was way beyond the class. I realized they were teaching Keynesian economics, and I didn't even think that theory was right. I thought Austrian economics was correct. So I had like debates with my professor and stuff. But that's really when it, taking learning into my own hands kind of started.
Yeah, absolutely. No, you're absolutely right. Identifying one's strengths is critical. And when students at a young age do that, and they identify what those learning strengths are, and they also identify those weaknesses, they learn to overcome those weaknesses through their strengths. And as such, so many kids these days who have learning differences truly can achieve academic success without having that pain of feeling stupid and the pain of kind of hitting rock bottom before they start sorting everything out.
Yeah, I don't think I ever still have that pain. Well, not that I have to do any math anymore, but man, math was like, right. I remember sitting in middle school and we had to do mental math, and it was like, I was so competitive, right? And I would get like 1 out of 7 questions right, and it was just like I would fear going to school because of that.
Devastate you.
Yeah, 53 plus 49 minus 6 plus 7 done. Next question. I'm like, I'm not. Yeah,
I hear you.
So dyslexia, like, has to be pretty debilitating as far as English and reading goes. But when did the world kind of recognize ADHD?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, ADHD for a long time, it was just looked at as like, typically it was found in boys, and it was just really thought that these kids were distractible. They were just kids that had high energy. And it really wasn't until really not too long ago where cognitively some scientists kind of went together and started recognizing, wow, there's actually, a chemical imbalance here within these individuals. And the H in ADHD is hyperactive. And so typically kids that have ADHD, in order for them to focus, it's almost ironic. If you ask someone with ADHD to sit down and focus, they start getting agitated. And the reason for that is, a quote unquote normal person without ADHD, they have the ability to release dopamine, which helps with the focus process. Somebody without ADHD can't do that. It just doesn't happen. So they create their own stimulus through hyperactivity to release what they need in order to cognitively focus. And as such, you ask somebody with ADHD to sit down and pay attention in a structured learning environment, they start like tapping on the desk and looking all over. It's them actually doing what you asked them to do, but yet it presents as being distracted or causing problems. And as such, teachers would tell those kids to take a walk or, get in trouble or whatever it is. But in actuality, the student was doing what they need in order to be more focused.
Right. You can tell me it's none of my business, but did you get a prescription for ADHD medication?
I didn't. My parents toyed with the idea.
Yeah.
I have, though I have ADHD, it's a bit of a spectrum. So it's really not a severe case. Like there's some individuals where it truly is debilitating and medicine makes sense for them. But it's interesting, from a medical perspective, ADHD is the most overprescribed thing, ADHD medicine, really in the world. And so many physicians, basically parents come in and say, child is super hyperactive. And they say, okay, why don't we put them on some ADHD meds? But really, the majority of people on ADHD, from my perspective, can function really well in life with structures, routines, producing healthy habits, things of that nature. The medicine doesn't really need to be there. So yeah, my parents chose not to go down that route and really chose to lean into what is it that's going to kind of consume DJ's energy that will help him be focused.
Yeah, and I mean, like I feel like not everyone has, well, certainly everyone has a spectrum of ability to focus on things that they don't want to do.
Yes.
Right? And there's some people who are super good at it. And then there's a whole, cocktail of, well, if you're extroverted, that's going to hurt. If you're creative, that's not good. If you've got a lot of energy, all these things can be, a perfect storm where I feel, and I don't know anything, but I feel like someone could be diagnosed as ADHD, but they could just have that, that storm of things going on. And
100%. Yeah, it's amazing because there's a lot of students that we come in contact with that we've been told have ADHD. And you kind of look at the home life, you're like, I don't think this is ADHD. Like, I think this is a really unstructured kind of chaotic home life.
Sure.
That has led this child to just have no kind of self-regulation skills.
Yeah. And I mean, now people are looking at the gut-brain connection, and kids who are eating 250 milligrams of sugar a day, that might manifest itself as ADHD, but they're just high on sugar. Yeah. It could be so many different things. So how does high school play out for you? Is there an improvement? What are your grades like?
Yeah, grades struggled. When I mentioned my parents figured out what my energy outlet was, it was actually drumming. Super got into drumming. My mom, she's from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. One weekend basically drove to one of her old friend's house in Pittsburgh and picked up a really old set of Ludwig drums and brought them back up, and I just started drumming. And because I was so into it, I got good at it. And my strategy through high school in order to graduate was to stack up on as many music courses as I could.
Okay, yeah,
because I did well.
Yep.
That made up for the the 50s in math and English that I was still struggling with. But that was a lot of high school. It was figuring out just how to kind of get through. It really wasn't until university that things began to really change for me. Just before university, I actually enlisted to the Canadian Forces.
How did that happen?
Oh man, so I had a teacher that asked me what I wanted to do with my life, and I don't know about you. When you're asked that question as a teenager, it was like my life, like
I'm living it.
What I want to do for lunch. Yeah, okay, exactly. Yeah. So huge question. Way wrong answer that I gave them, whatever it was.
So you gave them lunch?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. And so landed me a spot at my guidance counselor's office. Sure. And at that time, I was big into kind of like first-person shooter games and stuff like that. So my guidance counselor says, hey, you're really good at these like first-person shooter games. I'm like, yeah, I am. Absolutely.
Can I play video games for a living?
Yeah. So he's like, I know what you got to do. And that's what I thought. I thought he was going to say like, go off to EA Games and become like some sort of, video game guy. But he said, no, you should join the Canadian Forces. You should join the Army. Okay. And I'm like, you're right. That makes total sense. Like, I'm good at video games. I should do that. So I listened to him and, I enlisted. And before I knew it, I was on a bus to Land Force Central Training Area in Meaford, Ontario. And everything changed. All of a sudden, I'm on course. And
like right out of high school?
Yeah.
So you're 17, 18.
Yeah.
Okay.
And in fact, it was just before my 18th birthday, so my mom actually had to sign some sort of waiver to let me get in.
And what did your parents say about that?
They were conflicted. My mom lived a bit of a hippie life growing up in America, so I'm pretty sure I went off to basic training, and I think she went down to like the Mothers Against Gun March in Washington, D.C., so they weren't super happy with it, but kind of understood it was my journey and I needed to go and figure this out.
Yeah.
But it was interesting because talk about kind of that UDL lesson I was mentioning. The military really understands how to train people. In fact, I would go as far back as saying they're probably one of the oldest learning and teaching organizations out there. If you think about it, like way back in the day when conflicts started to arise, people started to organize themselves to defend themselves and to set off attacks, and they had to train these individuals.
Of like a complete disparity of,
that's right,
of different people.
100%. And fast forward to modern day militaries, you're 100% right. They open up their doors to pretty much anybody. So it all starts with an aptitude test that kind of lets you know, based on your person, what are some of the occupations within the military would be a good fit for you. And then when you decide which one you want to kind of go into, the training is completely differentiated, which means every one skill we learned was shown in kind of those 4 different ways I mentioned. And I remember one morning, it was like the first week in basic, we get up at like 0500 and we march over to the parade square. Okay. And there we all are kind of standing at ease. And then our sergeant walks out with this like massive wash basin and like puts it in front of himself, and he calls us to attention. So we all snap to, and he goes, "Today you're going to learn how to shave your face." Okay. And then he just starts shaving in front of us, and we're all like, what is going on? But he did that for all the visual learners to see what the proper military technique to a properly military shaven face looked like. Okay. And then after that, he walked us through it again, but like broke down the elements one at a time and told us. So all the people that are audio learners are getting that instruction. Right. After that, we were marched over to a tent line, and there was a tent set up in like a classroom configuration, and we were all issued Canadian Forces field manuals on like how to shave our face. So the people that, learn through reading and comprehension and retention, they could get it. And then for the kinesthetic learners, my gosh, we were like shaving our face like 2 times a day just to figure it out. But that is a perfectly differentiated instruction that it allowed every type of learner to have equal access to that content. Right. So I found myself thriving in that environment. And this is where my self-esteem actually really began to shift, because I started recognizing, I'm like, wait a second. The Canadian government thinks I'm pretty smart because I was doing well. Like maybe I'm not as stupid as I've led myself to believe. And on top of that, a lot of my ADHD challenges were getting sorted out just due to the nature that I started understanding I had to take control and I had to have self-regulation, because if I didn't, I was like in a world of hurt because my sergeants in the army can't do that. And so it was such a growth period for me that I just learned so much about myself. And when I left the military, I had the opportunity to go to university.
How long were you in the military for, though?
3 years.
Okay. And you enlisted for the 3 years and you did that?
Yeah, so I was a reservist, which meant it was done part-time. Okay. So it was kind of weekends and summers. So it allowed me to do that kind of in late high school and then transition into university. And then in university, I took a lot of the skills that I'd learned and applied them to the academic setting. And again, everything changed. I understood structure and routine was important for me. I got disciplined, and like every day started my day by making my bed at university, and that just set my mind right for everything to come. And that's where I was introduced to a learning strategist who, for the first time ever, kind of made a map of my brain and said, "You're dyslexic and you're ADHD. You're not stupid. Just things work differently." And kind of mapped it all out and started sharing with me strategies that would take advantage again of my learning modalities, which are very kinesthetic, visual and auditory. And that's also where I was given assistive technology for the first time. So like you said, for your experience, there's something that read your books out loud. I had the exact same thing.
Okay.
And it changed everything. Like, Gary, when I try to read on my own, I only comprehend maybe 10, 20% of what I'm reading, which is why I have to reread things like 3, 4, 5 times. Every time I go over it, I know a little bit more.
Yep.
But if I listen to it, it overcomes all of those challenges that dyslexia presents.
Right.
And I'm getting it just in a different way.
Right.
And as such, I'm comprehending like 80% of it on the first listen. And like, that was just completely game changing.
What'd you take at university?
It's funny you asked that. I started as a history major because I liked, war stuff. And I figured, why not? We can learn about war history.
Yep.
And I was completely failing out after my first kind of semester. And that same learning strategist said, what are you doing? Like, all history is like essays and
and reading. Yeah,
This is none of your strengths. So he convinced me to switch into business because he's like, DJ, it's group work. You're good at presenting. You're a creative guy. Like, that's what you should get into. So that's what I did. I shifted into business, and it was definitely the right move. Because again, it kind of hit all those modalities that I was really, really good at. And that's where the confidence just began to explode. Things made sense in a way that they never did before.
Right. So where did you go to school?
Trent University.
Okay. So you graduate with a business degree.
Yeah.
And you succeed at that because you're not writing an essay a week.
Correct.
And reading as much. Yeah, I took business as well. And it was...
Where'd you go?
Guelph.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Yeah. It was good. I did the real estate and housing program.
Okay.
And they did, it was only there and UBC.
No
and it was great. It was like high school. It was just a bunch of guys and we were all pretty close knit. We just did our alumni golf tournament.
Fun.
Good group.
Nice.
So you finish university, you graduate successfully.
Yeah. What
happens after that?
It's so funny because if people who are watching this may be like me with ADHD in particular. And if you're like me, you'll know that organization is not a strength of ours.
Right.
And even pre-planning is not a strength of ours. So it's funny, you say that I graduate successfully. I did. However, in my final semester, I remember being hauled into my academic advisor's room, and she said, DJ, you're short 1 credit. I'm like, how is this possible? She's like, I don't know. You don't have enough credits. So I was super embarrassed as she brokered a deal with the university that I could graduate with all my classmates, but I was handed just a blank piece of paper as a diploma.
That's great.
Then I had to take summer school that summer. That was the deal in order to get enough credits.
Great.
So, I mean, I share that with you because, again, planning hadn't connected yet. And my brother, who I had mentioned, is 3 years older than I, same LD that I have. He was given the same assistive tech that I had. He's super successful. He went on to complete his master's and doctorate and postdoctorate in neuropsychology.
Holy cow.
He's a tenured professor down at U of T now. And he, when I left school, he said, DJ, you got to get a job. And I didn't really know what I wanted to do. So I kind of started doing some assistive technology camps with him actually. And my plan was to kind of do this and this was going to be my living. However, I didn't understand the market, the industry, or anything. And a family friend of mine gave me really great advice. Said, DJ, you got to learn a market. Best thing to do is go and work for somebody and kind of figure it out. And then you can go off and do your own thing. I knew I wanted to do my own thing. I don't work well for people. I've learned that. And as such, my brother, who was working at an assistive technology company that basically sold into the education system, said, why don't you be a trainer for us? And Gary, again, it's so funny how for somebody like me, my mind moves so quickly that details can often get lost. I remember interviewing at this organization that my brother was at, and he got me the interview, and it went pretty well. And then I chose to find another outfit that was similar, and I got an interview there. And they both gave me offers. And I went back to the first one and I said to them, listen, I'm not going to come and work for you. And the owner of the organization was like, what are you talking about? Like, your brother set this all up. I'm like, I'm not going to do it. He's like, why? I said, well, quite frankly, the other company is going to pay me more money. Gary, flat out, he goes, no, they're not. And I was shocked.
Yeah.
And then I got embarrassed. I'm like, did I screw this up? I'm like, no, I'm right. I'm like, they're paying more money. He said, DJ, trust me. You got this wrong. They're not going to pay you more money. I'm like, well, they are. I get off the call. I like take out the 2 offers. I'm like, oh, how did I mess this up? Sure enough, I just got confused and I declined the offer that was going to pay me more money at this one company.
No, that your brother had set up.
Yeah, everything. And my brother's like, what are you doing? I'm like, I don't know. Leave me alone.
With confidence, though.
Yeah, of course. But I mean, I believe things happen for reasons. And I was working at this other organization, and I started training in the Toronto District School Board, kids with learning disabilities. And I was transparent with my LD, and kids responded, and I was having good success. And as such, schools would request me, and I was asked to talk at some kind of board functions. And another organization that sold similar type of software basically outreached to me and said, we want you to come and grow a coaching organization or coaching division for us. And again, the LD community it's a pretty small community, as I'm sure racing is.
Sure, yeah.
So I get up to this other company, which is in Aurora, and the owner sits me down and he says, so how's your master's going? And then I realize, oh my goodness, this guy thinks that I'm my brother.
Oh boy.
He's got the wrong Cunningham sitting here, applying for this job.
Right.
And I'm like, not doing a master's. He's like, oh, haven't started? I'm like, nope. I'm like, are you thinking of Todd, my brother? And at that point, I think he was embarrassed. Interview went along. They ended up hiring me anyhow.
Yeah.
And again, it's fascinating because like things happen for a reason. So, in that I wasn't there for very long, but I started really understanding kind of this market, this assistive technology and education market. And they somewhat made me a face to this one piece of assistive technology called WordCue. And I was sent to conferences kind of all over North America, and I just started meeting people and connecting. And then there was, again, one of those life-defining moments where I went to the owner of the organization. I said, okay, you want me to try to grow kind of the training division. This is what I think we should do. We should hire people that have learning disabilities, that are users of this technology. Because again, kids are going to connect with them. We're going to get way further. And he just looked at me and he said, we will not do that. Like, people with learning disabilities are disorganized. We're probably going to be liable because they can't spell and the communication will be horrible. Again, I'm like, you know my backstory, right?
Yeah, that's me.
That is me.
Yeah.
So I had what I call kind of my Jerry Maguire moment where I'm not sure if I quit or I got fired, but words were exchanged and I left and spent like 3 days just writing what coaching should look like. And that was the catalyst for Learnstyle. I decided at that point I had enough knowledge of the industry to give it a go. My father just finished working at the Ministry of Education, so I kind of approached
Pretty good
him. Yeah. And I said, listen, I understand coaching, like you understand educational structure. Like, I think together we can really help a lot of kids in Ontario. Mom remortgaged the house, gave me, the $40,000 seed money to get going, and we started the organization. And pretty quickly we grew from like a shop of kind of 3 or 4 people to, before we knew it, 50 people. Happy to say the organization that I left, they lost all the contracts to us. So that was kind of a sweet little moment at one point in time. But yeah, now we've grown it to the largest direct-to-student coaching organization within the country.
So self-admittedly, organization isn't your strongest point.
Correct.
But you're now running a very large company. How do you what kind of strategies do you use? How do you deal with it?
A ton.
Okay.
So it's a great question, or it's a great point to make, because I think some people, organization, it just comes naturally. For me, it really doesn't. So I am so intentional with organization. I truly do wake up every morning and make my bed, because I know that structure just sets me in a good space. In fact, I just had the good fortune to speak at my kids' school.
Okay.
And I gave all the kids a 60-day challenge to make their bed every single morning, first thing when they wake up. And there's something to it that you probably don't want to do that, but if you just do it, you feel a little bit more successful and you feel a little bit more in control of your day.
For sure.
And as such, starting the day like that, it allows me to really think more intentionally about how my time is going to be spent. For me, organization, it's all about going back to a calendar system. It is ensuring that I'm in sync with that. It's having, smart devices that will chime at me when I need to move to my next thing. And it's these types of habits that truly people with ADHD, when they establish them, all of those challenges get managed. They don't go away, but they become manageable.
Right.
The other thing is, for me, organization, I have to have exercise in my life.
I was going to ask that. Yeah.
There is a direct correlation between focus that allows you to think about organization and time management and exercise. And I have a little theory that it's my own little theory. There's no science on it whatsoever. However, I find for basically every 10 minutes of exercise you give yourself, it allows you to have an hour of focus through the day. So when I wake up, it has to be like an hour and a half at the gym or running or cycling or something. If I don't do that, I just find I have such a hard time with concentration and focus. So it's one of the things people ask me all the time, what should I do for my kids or myself? Exercise is one of those first things in terms of strategies that you should implement.
For sure. For sure. Like you think about what we were designed to do and it's work all day.
Yeah.
Physically. I couldn't agree more. For me, like, the high you get, the mental clarity you get after, especially cardio.
Yes.
Is unparalleled.
It is.
For sure.
And it's free.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Do you do, I'm big into the, just because of racing, I do a lot of sauna stuff for heat adaptability.
Okay.
Do you do any of that stuff, hot or cold?
Not well. So cold showers. That's where it's at for me.
Yeah.
It's super. I go super hot and then as cold as I possibly can.
You got to get to just cold.
Yeah,
just cold.
Just cold, eh?
Oh, yeah,
just go right in cold.
I'm on year 4 of just cold showers.
Good for you, man.
Yeah.
Have you done like the whole Wim Hof method?
Oh yeah, dude. So it's we were out in Revelstoke for a little bit. This was probably 2 years ago now. And the Columbia River runs through there. So it's 0 degrees, like the river, even in the summer. So Lauren and I are down at the river, and I jump in, and I'm drying off, and some guy walks by, and he goes, "Never regret it, right?" And I'm like, yeah, never. And he's like, 5 o'clock on Friday, meet under the bridge. So, and my brother's into it, and all the guys we were living with, like, we'd always go into the, we'd call it washing our sins away. We'd always go into the river. And so we meet up at 5 o'clock, and there's like 40 people all doing the Wim Hof breathing, going into the river. It's great. It's catching on.
Yeah.
Like the benefits are awesome.
Yeah.
But we did so now we've got a deep freeze. Instead of like a proper cold plunge.
No way.
You just get a deep freezer.
Okay.
Silicone it up, run it on a timer, fill it with water.
That's how you do it.
Yeah.
Get out.
Yeah. You got to get on it.
Okay.
Compared to the cold showers, it's
next
3
level,
times as good.
Oh, geez. It's funny you say that because I'm fortunate enough to live like 4 minutes from a beach in South Durham. And there's a guy that's religious. I swear to you, every time I walk in the morning or run in the morning, he's out there doing his cold plunge.
Nice.
It could be February.
Yeah.
He's out there.
Yeah.
Super impressive.
So you're now completely immersed in, the school system, the public education. Did you go to public school?
I did, yeah.
Okay, yeah. If you could redesign, it's probably a lofty question, but if you could redesign the public education system or even make small tweaks, where would you start? What would you do?
Yeah, man, if it's a clean slate and you could do whatever you want, there's so much to be said about, again, that UDL approach I was speaking of. The challenge with that is it's just resourcing and support.
Sure.
So what has been found, smaller class sizes in particular, is critical.
Yeah.
grouping people more by ability is critical. I think at times we struggle with our system because we're asking our educators to do so much.
30 kids in a classroom, ranging from a kid licking the wall to literal calculus.
100%.
Yeah.
And so we're expecting them to be superhuman and figure this out.
Yeah.
And how do you create that learning environment that's going to equal all of them? It just can't happen. So for me, it's a complete restructuring of even how we view classes in terms of, is it by age? Maybe it's by ability instead. So if we start thinking that way, it starts allowing a teacher to be way more intentional with, okay, here's the group I have. Here's kind of the spectrum of learner that I have. How can I ensure that I'm moving them as far as I possibly can? As to where, again, it is today, it's kind of you're teaching to almost the middle, and those two outliers are really not getting the support that they want. So it'd be that. It's how do we create a system that's well supported so that we're enabling equal access to content for all of our different types of learners. And then for me, technology is a huge component of that. So let's get to the point where assistive technology isn't just for kids in special education.
Sure.
There's a saying that we often use, what's essential for some like me is beneficial for all.
Right.
Like you were able to utilize that text to speech and it worked for you. So let's start having that ingrained as our practice, as opposed to saying, you shall learn to read, and this is the way that you're going to study, and this is the one way that you're going to do your output, so on and so forth. Let's have this more universal model where, again, tools and techniques, it's not just for the special education students anymore. It's for all types of students.
Right. Do you think inherently... So preparing for this, I looked up, because you always hear, classrooms and the school system is designed to create good factory workers.
Yeah.
Right? With the bell, how many bells ring in a school day.
Lots.
And you walk down the hall in single file and yada, yada, yada. And I guess that's really where it came from, trying to create good soldiers and then good at the Industrial Revolution, good
course.
factory workers.
Of course.
Do you think there needs to be some kind of a decentralizing of the education system to, maybe how the school system was before, where each township had a whole range of ages in one schoolhouse, and that teacher completely did what they thought was right for that group of kids and all the way along. Whereas, maybe the curriculum for northern BC, well, and I guess they are broken up by provinces, but go with me here. Like, for the curriculum for northern BC might not be the same for Oshawa.
Right. Right.
Do you think giving teachers maybe more autonomy or principals more autonomy to structure their school how they want is an answer? Yeah,
for sure. And also what's really critical, often education is looked at as K to 12. Like a lot of that structure routine is super important for primary kids to learn that discipline, that self-regulation, that I come in, I hang my jacket up, I know where I sit on the carpet. And if anything, like currently in education, there's almost been a reverse where it's like, well, let's let them have so much autonomy at such a young age. We want them to have play-based this and that. That's some of that just life skill that is needed.
Structure for life,
is not happening. So a bit of me would almost say we almost got to go back to some of the fundamentals when we look at our primary learners.
Got it.
Once we start getting more into kind of our intermediate secondary, 100%. And there's actually a lot of great success stories in districts in Ontario that have taken a look at their reference. So for instance, there's a district kind of in the Huron area here in Ontario that recognized they were having so many of their students leave the township and go to cities for work.
Right.
And so they started figuring out, how can we have them stay here? How can we make sure that they add back to our economy, that they can see themselves living here for life? And so they brought in a whole curriculum around coding because they recognized, wait a second, if we get them to become basically developers, they can do that anywhere.
Right.
And they actually worked with the local town to have incentives to start businesses that were web shops. So the idea was, let's skill them up in high school, get them super interested, let them go off and do some of their advanced learning at university or college, but then let's have a structure set up where it's advantageous for them to come back to our community and set up shop here and be able to be successful business owners and give back to our community. And I thought it was a super out of the box thought process of how to support local kids, a local community, and really how do we add to a thriving economy. And as I understand, it's working quite well. Like these kids, there's not as many of them leaving forever. They're doing their education, they're post-secondary, but they're actually coming back and they're there being successful, having families and growing that community. Right. So I think the local context, like you suggested, is massively important.
For sure. Because if you grow up and everyone in the school is a farmer, and you know, by the time they're in grade 4, they're like, I don't need this. Like, I'm going to be a farmer.
Right.
But if you could, you know, I guess gear it specifically for that locality. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure.
Do you, I'm sure you do, but do you play around with ChatGPT?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
What do you think of that?
Oh, man. Mixed feelings on it. Okay. Like, scares the heck out of me because, you know, you type in, I want an English essay on whatever, and boom, it's out there.
Right.
So I think that's the genie that is going to be hard to put back in the bottle.
I don't think you can put it back.
No.
Yeah.
How do we leverage it? Somebody living with, you know, a communication-based disability, especially in the written format, I have found it super, super helpful. I have a grave fear of writing email.
Okay.
I really do.
Okay.
For me to craft a really well-written email, first of all, I have to get through a lot of anxiety. And then it takes me a lot of prep work, a lot of drafts, a lot of editing, and even still, I'm scared to press send when it's a critical email. I have found with ChatGPT, it's really helpful because I can write that draft, kind of throw it into it, and ask it, can you condense this to this many words, or can you have this sound more professional? And it spits it back out, and I read it. And the critical thing when I look at it as a tool, if I understand the message that it is saying and it's doing it more concise than I can say it, that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Because I'm trying to communicate something. I'm not trying to impress somebody with my writing skill. I'm simply trying to communicate a message. And with my writing challenge, I have a hard time doing that. There's an organization out of the UK that we work closely with. And they're actually a calendar organization company. And so they're called Time Navi. They're fantastic. They basically help you track all of your time and you can begin to put weighting on different activities. So for me, I want, 50% of my week to be really focused on financial and sales and 20% on leadership. And so it does all this analysis for me. At any rate, they reached out to me and they were thinking about how do we add an element of ChatGPT into email. And so we worked with them and created this concept of, again, you can kind of write an email, then you can press a button. I want it to be professional or fun or funny. And it leverages it that way. And it creates a tone for you, which to me is super helpful because at times I have a hard time just with my dyslexia, getting the tone into email.
Yeah.
So for me, it's super exciting technology. I think from a purely, accommodation tools stance, there's so much opportunity to leverage it. And on the flip side, as a business owner, I see it creating a lot of efficiencies for us.
Sure.
So a lot of the challenges, it's not challenges, but a lot of time spent is our field coaches writing notes about what it is that they've just done with a student.
Yep.
So the ability to, again, put in a couple of point form notes and have it turn into a report that goes back to the school that reflects what actually happened.
Right.
But is perhaps more concise or in a more professional format, that allows my team members to be more student focused than thinking about how do I get this report done,
right?
Well with this child. So again, I think there's such opportunity.
Yeah.
What for you guys? Racing, like, where does that all hit in?
No, I don't know. I've said this for years now about the AI, like, you know, the whatever, the not the singularity AI, but like, you know, really advanced AI for racing. It'll give the perfect setup, like for the car. So you plug in all your, you know, what the car is, and it comes back with, this is the spring rate, this is, you know, when you pit, this is yada yada yada, and it, you know, I guess it'll never be, the setup in theory could be perfect, you know, then the strategy given to your crew chief could be like an A strategy, B strategy, C strategy, if then this, right? So I think, and you know, depending on how involved in racing you are, you know to a greater or lesser degree how important the car is.
Right.
You know, everyone in Formula One can wheel a car. The guy with the best car wins 9 times out of 10. So if it made the playing field level, now it's like, you know, hockey or tennis. Now it's, you know, talent and work ethic and the driver. Whereas, you know, in so many, even to this day, but, you know, guys would show up in the 60s and 70s with a car that would lap the entire field, and he isn't lapping the entire field.
It's the car.
You know, that thing's on rails. So that's what I'm excited for AI there. For ChatGPT, yeah, I think it's great. I don't know. I think it's so early, you know.
So early.
It's going to be, and I don't understand it enough. Will it? Because what I understand it as right now is just, you know, an amalgamation of everything that's already out there. Mm-hmm. It's not coming up with anything new. Right. But when will it start to come up with, you know, novel ideas, or you know, I guess that's really when it is, you know, thinking on its own.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Where I get excited about the AI element, and this is where I've talked a lot about kind of the coaching side of LearnStyle, but on the software side, building these IEPs, such a critical part about an IEP is understanding what's the right strategy fit for the student based on the learning challenges that they have. And right now it's totally left up to an educator making that decision. So Gary, we literally have hundreds of thousands of IEP records. And what I'm excited about with AI, what we can begin to do is start to scrub through all of that and have really AI start thinking about this and start helping to suggest to an educator, hey, based on your inputs of this child and based on the, you know, hundreds of thousands of records we have and the 10,000 kids that are kind of like the student, like here are some suggestions for you. And then the AI can start actually taking in some of that geographical relevance, because a strategy that a student's using, you know, in rural Ontario may not work for a kid that's in an urban setting. So that factor could be added into it. And we're playing around with it right now. We got a guy that this is what his mind shares on. And it's incredibly interesting to start seeing how from that stance, it can be really helpful for us. And then even things like EA allocation. You only have so many resources in a school district.
What's EA? Yeah.
Education assistance.
Okay.
So typically school boards, the most invasive type of support is having a human sit next to a child all day long.
Yeah.
And that's actually not ideal. Being that the second that child leaves the education system, they don't have that person sitting there anymore.
Right.
So if they don't have the ability, for instance, to toilet themselves, if it's a very complex student we're working with, you now are relying on a family member to perhaps give up a job to stay home to help that individual. So the concept is, how do we aid and fade the support so the person comes to a more state of independence? But what typically happens today, the squeaky wheel gets the oil. So the schools that perceive themselves having the most needs will complain and whine and get parent support behind it, and districts will give EAs to those schools. But it might not be the right fit.
Right.
So using AI, we can start, again, taking a look at student information and start kind of scrubbing it and understanding who truly needs that level of support, and start kind of creating these independence milestones that can be inputted. So the AI can start helping us understand, here's when we should be weaning that support off, and here's when that child should be at the point where they can be more independent. And that excites me because that allows us to be more really precise with our resources, getting the resources to the students who truly need it. And to me, that's efficiencies. That's going to really start changing the trajectory of some of these kids' lives.
Yeah. Yeah. The AI, like going through, because we've collected now, especially, at an ever increasing rate, collected data. Right. And who analyzes that data? Like you almost can't, right?
Yeah.
Whereas the AI can do it in a second.
Yeah. The challenge though, there's still a bias.
Right.
And
but there always will be.
Who knows, man, right?
But there's a bias because you're valuing something.
Yeah.
Right? Because the there's infinite variables in the world.
Yeah.
Infinite. So you have to focus, even if you're not putting like a specific value on something, you're putting a focus on something, so you are implicitly valuing that thing, right? So there's always going to be a bias.
Yeah.
You have to direct, right? It's not going to come up with what's good. That's the realm of moral philosophy, right? You have to put that in there, but I think it's a tool. I don't know if it'll ever get to it being unbiased or, telling you what to value.
I don't know. It's amazing to me because I couldn't even have fathomed where we are today with it. So, 20 years from now, who knows what it all looks like.
Oh, who knows?
Right?
The world is stranger than we can suppose. Like, who knows?
Well said.
Yeah. I ask everyone a piece of advice at the end. So I guess, what piece of advice would you give to parents who have a child with a learning disability?
It's a great question. Truly, the advice I give parents is to just love on their kids so much, because these kids often have troubles at school and they come home and they feel pretty beat up. And as parents, the greatest gift you offer is the safe haven of a safe environment. So the advice is you double down on the love of those kids. And it's through that love, you're going to start noticing what experiences the child likes. And there you give them the opportunity to explore those. What I've noticed, especially kids with learning disabilities, when they find the thing that they feel good at, it changes everything. They now have purpose. So all of the learning challenges they may have kind of get sorted out, or they don't feel the effects of them nearly as much because they have that one thing. And arguably, I think that's everybody. I think once you find that purpose in life, the challenges that you perceive kind of go away a little bit, and happiness is achieved. So for me, the advice is it's double down on the love for your child that has a learning disability or ADHD.
That's good.
Dude, what about advice for me?
No, I don't give advice.
You don't give advice?
No.
From all
I
of
just
your
ask.
years,
I just
all
ask.
of your years of racing,
No,
and all of your life experiences?
I think that's great. Well, talk about love forever. Like, love is the force, the creative force behind the universe.
Yeah. Agreed.
Yeah. I appreciate you coming on, man.
Thank you for having me.
This was great.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Awesome. See you guys next week.